I scored 1590 on the SAT, and in this video, I'll be doing a walkthrough of Digital SAT Practice Test 3's reading and writing section. With that being said, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's go and get started with question number 1. In the early 1800s, the Cherokee scholar Sequoyah created the first script or writing system for an indigenous language in the United States. Because it represented the sounds of spoken Cherokee so accurately, his script was easy to learn and thus quickly achieved blank use by 1830. Over 90% of the Cherokee people could read and write it. Okay, so I would assume that this would be something along the lines of widespread use because we have over 90% of the Cherokee people could read and write it. Okay, keep in mind when you come across a question like this on the reading and writing section, try to fill in the blank before going to your answer choices when it's a reading type question. For writing, it's a little bit different, but I'll talk about that later. Okay, so in this case, we have widespread, which is actually perfect, right? We have over 90% of the Cherokee people are now able to read and write it. So obviously that's going to be widespread use. If we take a look at B, C, and D, we have careful. That wouldn't make sense here. Neither would unintended or infrequent. It's obviously going to be frequent, right? Because 90% of the Cherokee people can read and write it. So that's way off. When Mexican-American archaeologist Zelia Maria Magdalena Nuttall published her 1886 research paper on sculptures found at the ancient indigenous city of Tenochtitlan in present-day Mexico, other researchers readily blank her work as groundbreaking. This recognition stemmed from her convincing demonstration that the sculptures were much older than they had previously thought. Okay, so I would assume that they readily labeled or something along those lines or praised something with a positive connotation. So labeled, praised would kind of be what I'd be looking at. We've got option A, acknowledge. They readily acknowledge her work as groundmaking. That would make sense. Ensured, they can't really ensure it. Denied it. They obviously are not denying that it's groundbreaking. They're not underestimating it. Okay, so acknowledge would make the most sense there. So our answer would be A. Like other tribal nations, the Muskogee Creek Nation is self-governing. Its national council generates laws regulating aspects of community life such as land use and healthcare, while the principal chief and cabinet officials blank those laws by devising policies and administering services in accordance with them. Okay, so I'm pretty much sure this is going to be something along the lines of apply or administers, something along those lines. So we've got option A, implement. Implement's pretty similar to applies or administers, more similar to applies, which honestly I think is a better fit up here. So implements looks good. We have B, presume. That wouldn't make sense in this context. C, improvise. They're not improvising the laws and they're not mimicking the laws. They are implementing the laws by devising policies and administering the services in accordance with them. So A would make the most sense there for question number 3. In the indigenous intercropping system known as the Three Sisters, maize, squash, and beans form a blank web of relations. Maize provides the structure on which the bean vines grow. The squash vines cover the soil, discouraging competition from weeds, and the beans aid their two sisters by enriching the soil with essential nitrogen. All right, so in this case, we have some sort of beneficial relationship between the three where they're sort of interwoven, obviously, since we have a web of relations. So if we take a look at our options, we have A, indecipherable. That wouldn't make sense because we do see that it is decipherable because we go on to describe it. Ornamental would essentially be sort of dealing with the appearance of them, which isn't the point here. We wouldn't describe the web of relations as ornamental. Obscure, it can't be because once again, we go on to describe what it is. Intricate would make sense because obviously it's kind of in a way, a complex sort of arrangement between the three, right? They're sort of interwoven together in an intricate web of relations, okay, where each is sort of dependent on the other. So that would make the most sense here. So our answer for 4 would have to be D. The artisans of the Egon Uranomam Guild in Benin City, Nigeria, typically blank the bronze and brass casting techniques that have been passed down through their family since the 13th century, but they don't strictly observe every tradition. Okay, so I'm assuming they do observe this one. So something along the lines of them continuing it. If we go on, we have, for example, guild members now use air conditioning motors instead of handheld bellows to help heat their forge. Which choice best completes the text in the most logical, precise word or phrase? With option A, experiment with. Okay, no, in this case, we're talking about them sticking to a tradition. We have option B, adhere to the bronze and brass casting techniques that have been passed down through the families since the 13th century. That would make sense since they are sticking with that tradition. And then we go on to give an example of where they don't stick with tradition. If we have C, improve on, that wouldn't make sense because they're not improving on it. They're not grappling with it, but they are adhering to that tradition. So B would be our answer there. Some economic historians blank that late 19th and early 20th century households in the United States experienced an economy of scale when it came to food purchases. They assumed that large households spent less on food per person than did small households. Economist Trevor Logan showed that, however, a close look at the available data disproves this supposition. Okay, so we basically have some economic historians assuming and making some sort of supposition, and then ultimately we have the data disproving that. So what would go in here would be something along the lines of something showing that they supposed that this was the case. We have option A, surmised. Okay, surmised is essentially to make some sort of conclusion without any sort of data to back it up. So that would make perfect sense here. If we look at B, contrived, that wouldn't really make sense here. Question wouldn't either, nor would regretted. Okay, so our answer would have to be A, surmised. Okay, if you don't know the definition of surmise, it's basically, essentially, if someone surmises something, they are coming to a conclusion or supporting a hypothesis, but they don't have any actual facts or evidence or data to support it. The work of Kiowa painter T.C. Cannon derives its power in part from the tension among his blank influences. Classic European portraiture with its realistic treatment of faces, the American pop art movement with its vivid colors and flat style, the intertribal painting style that rejects the effect of depth typically achieved through shading and perspective. So we have a list of all these influences: European, American, intertribal. My initial gut would say something along the lines of diverse, but we can take a look at our options. We have complementary A. We can get rid of that one because we have up here, we say that its power in part from the tension among these influences. You can't have tension among things that are complementary. Complementary things will smoothly go together. So that would be the opposite of what we're looking for. If we look at B, unknown, we know they're known because we go on to list all three of them. Disparate would basically just mean that they are distinct, which would make sense because obviously we have distinct components that come together. And since they are distinct, they do have that tension. So that would make sense. If we look at D, we have interchangeable. They can't be interchangeable because obviously European portraiture, American pop art movement, like those things you can't interchange with each other. They're all different. And because they're different, they have that tension. And so disparate would make the most sense there. So C would have to be our answer for number 7. New and interesting research conducted by Suleiman al Sweden and Moath al-Hajjaj is inspired by their observation that though there have been many studies on the effect of high altitude on blood chemistry, there's a blank studies on the effect of blood chemistry of living in locations below sea level, such as California towns of Salton City and Sealy. Okay, well, since we say that there have been many studies of the effect of high altitude on blood chemistry above sea level, well, then we would assume that we would contrast that with there is a shortage of studies. Okay, so a shortage of studies. So I'd put shortage of there. If we look at our options, we have A, quarrel about. We're not quarreling over anything. We've got B, paucity of. Okay, that would be essentially a lack of, which would make the most sense to go along with shortage of. So that looks good. We can take a look at C and D. C, profusion of. Well, that would be the opposite of there being a shortage of. That'd mean that there is plenty. If we have D, a verisimilitude in, okay, that wouldn't make sense there either. Okay, verisimilitude would essentially mean to sort of make something appear real, which is obviously not even close to what we're dealing with here. We just need something that represents that there's a shortage of studies on the effect of blood chemistry of living in locations below sea level. We know that the best way to show that is with answer choice B, which essentially shows that there is a lack of studies of the effect of blood chemistry of living in locations below sea level. The following text is from Sarah Orne Jouette's 1899 short story, Martha's Lady. Martha's employed by Miss Pine as maid. Miss Pine sat by the window watching in her best dress, looking stately and calm. She seldom went out now, and it was almost time for the carriage. Martha was just coming in from the garden with the strawberries and with more flowers in her apron. It was a bright, cool evening in June. The golden robins sang in the elms, and the sun was going down behind the apple trees at the foot of the garden. The beautiful old house stood wide open to the long-expected guest. Which choice best states the main purpose of the text? We got option A, to convey the worries brought about by a new guest. It doesn't really say that anyone's worried anywhere, so we can get rid of A. B, to describe how the characters have changed over time. I think that that's focusing in too narrow on essentially the first couple sentences, or really the first sentence where it says that she looked stately and calm. She seldom went out now, so indicating a sort of transition from her going out in the past, but that's too narrow. It's not the main purpose of the text, so I think we can get rid of B as well there. If we take a look at C, to contrast the activity indoors with the stillness outside. That's really, I don't think that's supported by the text really at all, to contrast activity indoors with stillness outside. We just don't see that in the text to have support. If you look at D, to depict the setting as the characters await a visitor's arrival, we do have at the end, the beautiful old house stood wide open to the long expected guests. We also have, it was almost time for the carriage. So I would presume that someone is coming in by carriage, and that is who the guest will be. So if we go down, option D, to depict the setting as the characters await a visitor's arrival. Okay, we see that a visitor is probably coming. We also have to depict the setting as the characters wait. Okay, that's ultimately what we do throughout the bulk of that text. So there's tons of textual support for that as well. Okay, so our answer would have to be D. Astronomers are confident that the star Betelgeuse will eventually consume all the helium in its core and explode in a supernova. They are much less confident, however, about when this will happen, since that depends on internal characteristics of Betelgeuse that are largely unknown. Astrophysicist Serafina Al-Badri-Nance and colleagues recently investigated whether acoustic waves in the star could be used to determine interstellar states, but concluded that this method could not sufficiently reveal Betelgeuse's internal characteristics to allow its evolutionary state to be firmly fixed. Which choice best describes the function of the second sentence in the overall structure of the text? All right, well, before we have this second sentence, we're ultimately stating that the astronomers are confident that Betelgeuse will eventually consume all the helium in its core and explode in a supernova. But after that, we describe that we don't know when that will actually happen, since it depends on internal characteristics. Then following that, we describe how we tried to figure it out, we being the astronomers, try to figure it out using acoustic waves, but then realized that wouldn't work. So we've got option A, explains how the work of Nance and colleagues was received by others in the field. We never really described that, and that's definitely not the function of the second sentence. If we've got B, it presents the central finding reported by Nance and colleagues. Well, it's not the central finding. It's just stating that they don't know when it will happen because of the internal characteristics of Betelgeuse. We have C, it identifies the problem that Nance and colleagues attempted to solve but did not. Okay, so the problem would be that they don't know when this will happen. Okay, they tried to solve that, but then were ultimately unable to, and it does identify that, right? So that would make sense there. If we take a look at D, we've got, it describes a serious limitation on the method used by Nance and colleagues. That's not the function of the second sentence. Okay, keep in mind, you need to pay attention to the function of the second sentence in the overall structure of the test. I think D would be more so applicable to sentences that follow the second sentence, but not the actual second sentence. The second sentence is identifying the problem, being that they don't know when it will happen, and then also that the colleagues attempted to solve it, but did not, when it states that method or introduces that method. So best answer there would be C, so C would be our answer. The following text is from Jane Austen's 1811 novel, Sense and Sensibility. Eleanor lives with her younger sisters and her mother, Mrs. Dashwood. Eleanor, this eldest daughter, whose advice was so effectual, possessed a strength of understanding and coolness of judgment which qualified her, though only 19, to be counselor of her mother and enabled her frequently to counteract to the advantage of them all that eagerness of mind in Miss Dashwood which must generally have led to imprudence. She had an excellent heart, her disposition was affectionate, and her feelings were strong, but she knew how to govern them. It was a knowledge which her mother had yet to learn, and which one of her sisters had resolved never to be taught. Okay, we've got, according to the text, what is true about Eleanor? Option A, Eleanor often argues with her mother but fails to change her mind. I don't really see any textual support for that. We've got B, Eleanor can be overly sensitive with regard to family matters. It doesn't say she's overly sensitive. It pretty much just sounds like she's very mature for her age, which looks like would actually be answer choice D. We've got C, she thinks her mother is a bad role model. It doesn't say that she thinks her mother is a bad role model. Okay, her mother may be a bad role model, and we may conclude that, but it doesn't. There's no textual support to state that Eleanor thinks that. So that'd be the problem with C, even though we as the audience may think that her mother is a bad role model. Then we have D. Eleanor is remarkably mature for her age. Okay, that's got tons of textual support. That's basically what that whole block of text is stating. Okay, so our answer would have to be D. Believing that living in an impractical space can heighten awareness and even improve health, conceptual artists Madeline Gins and Shusaku Arakawa designed an apartment building in Japan to be more fanciful than functional. A kitchen counter is chest high on one side and knee high on the other. A ceiling has a door to nowhere. The effect is disorienting but invigorating. After 4 years there, filmmaker Nobu Yamawaka reported significant health benefits. All right, so ultimately, sounds like the health benefits are going to be coming from the fact that it's in practical space, right? Heightens awareness, improves health. We've got option A, for which choice best states the main idea of the text. Although inhabiting a home surrounded by fanciful features, such as those designed by Gins and Akinawa, can be rejuvenating, it's unsustainable. We don't ever make the claim that it is unsustainable. Okay, so we can get rid of that one there. Let's go ahead and keep moving on. We got B. Designing disorienting spaces like those in Gins and Akinawa building is the most effective way to create a physically stimulating environment. We never state that it's the most effective way, so we can get rid of B. Key part there being most. Okay, and then we got C. As a filmmaker, Yamawaka has long supported the designs of conceptual artists such as Gins and Arakawa. That's not the main idea. And then we have D. Although impractical, the design of the apartment building by Gins and Arakawa may improve the well-being of the building's residents. Yes, that has a lot of textual support, so D would have to be our answer. In a research paper, a student criticizes some historians of modern African politics, claiming that they have evaluated Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister of what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, primarily as a symbol rather than in terms of his actions. Which quotation from a work by a historian would best illustrate the student's claim? We have option A. Lumumba is a difficult figure to evaluate due to the starkly conflicting opinions he inspired during his life and continues to inspire today. Well, that's not talking about really his actions. That's just talking about opinions he inspired during his life. That's not really his actions. That's sort of a level beyond that, one step in front. We look at B. The available information makes it clear that Lumumba's political beliefs and values were largely consistent throughout his career. Once again, that's not really talking about his actions. We have C now. Lumumba's practical accomplishments can be passed over quickly. It is mainly as the personification of Congolese independence that he warrants scholarly attention. Okay, if we go back up to our ultimate claim, okay, the claim is that they have evaluated Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister of what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, primarily as a symbol rather than in terms of his actions. Okay, well, C would have really strong support for that, right? His practical accomplishments can be passed over quickly. It's mainly the personification of Congolese independence that warrants a scholarly attention. So that's really strong support. If we take a look at D, many questions remain about Lumumba's ultimate vision for an independent Congo. Without new evidence coming to light, these questions are likely to remain unanswered. That does not support the claim. So the only answer choice here that would support the claim would be answer choice C. Question 14%, of Ondo State small-scale farmers who are female by main crop grown. Y-axis, female farmers as percentage of total. And then on our sort of our x-axis are our bars. We have North Ondo, Central, South, cereals, root crops, non-root vegetables. Geographer Adidayo Oluwaden and his colleagues surveyed small-scale farmers in 3 locations in Ondo State, Nigeria, which has mountainous terrain in the north, an urbanized center, and coastal terrain in the south. To learn more about their practices, like the types of crops they mainly cultivated, in some regions, female farmers were found to be especially prominent in the cultivation of specific types of crops and even constituted the majority of farmers who cultivated those crops. For instance, and then if we go over to our answer choices, we see that we've got for instance, and then which choice most effectively uses data from the graph to complete the example. All right, so let's take a look at the graph, and we'll also quickly take a look at what sort of quickly came before the for instance. All right, so if we go down, we've got in some regions, female farmers were found to be especially prominent in the cultivation of specific types of crops and even constitute the majority of farmers. Okay, so we need one where they're the majority of farmers who cultivated these crops. Okay, so if we go up to our graph, we need one where they're the majority. Okay, so we have female farmers as a percentage of the total. We see that they're the majority in 2 cases. Okay, that is where it's South Ondo and North Ondo, and that is specifically for non-root vegetables. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at our answer choices. So non-root vegetables in North and South Ondo are what we are looking for. We've got option A, most of the farmers who mainly cultivated cereals, and most farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables in South Ondo were women. Okay, most would mean majority. We see it's not the case. If we look at B, more women in Central Ondo mainly cultivated root crops than mainly cultivated cereals. Once again, it's not what we're looking for. C, most of the farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables in North and South Ondo were women. Yes, this is showing that the majority is right. Most of the farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables in North and South Ondo were women. So majority are women, which is what we need to support. Okay, so our answer there would have to be answer choice C. We can quickly take a look at D as well, just to make sure we got a relatively equal proportion of women across 3 regions of Ondo, mainly cultivated cereals. We know that's not true according to the graph. C is true according to the data as I showed earlier. Given that stars and planets initially form from the same gas and dust in space, some astronomers have posited that host stars such as the sun and their planets, such as those in our solar system, are composed of the same materials, with the planets containing equal or smaller quantities of the materials that make up the host star. This idea is also supported by evidence that rocky planets in our solar system are composed of the same materials as the sun, which, finding if true, would most directly weaken the astronomer's claim. Let's go ahead and underline the astronomer's claim. Okay, so we have some astronomers posited that host stars such as the sun and their planets, such as those in our solar system, are composed of the same materials. All right, so if we are composed of the same materials, with the planets containing equal or smaller quantities of the materials that make up the host star. So which finding if true would weaken it? We have option A, most stars are made of hydrogen and helium, but when cooled, they are revealed to contain small amounts of iron and silicate. Okay, not necessarily, because I don't think we actually state what the materials are. So we'd have to actually make a comparison to the sun, right? Or the host stars and their planets. We have to make a comparison to the planets then, since we have the host stars in A. If we take a look at B, we've got a nearby host star is observed to contain the same proportion of hydrogen and helium as that of the sun. Okay, that would actually be in support, not weakening the claim. We've got C. Evidence emerges that the amount of iron in some rocky planets is considerably higher than the amount in their host star. Okay, if we go up, we see that we have, as the second part of this claim, with the planets containing equal or smaller quantities of the materials that make up the host star. If we look at C, okay, we have the iron in planets is higher than the amount in the host star. So that would directly weaken that claim. So C would have to be our answer there. In the 20th century, ethnographers made a concerted effort to collect Mexican-American folklore, but they did not always agree about that folklore's origins. Scholars such as Aurelio Espinosa claim that Mexican-American folklore derived largely from the folklore of Spain, which ruled Mexico and what is now the southwestern United States from the 16th to early 19th centuries. Scholars such as Americo Paredes, by contrast, argued that while some Spanish influence is undeniable, Mexican-American folklore is mainly the product of the ongoing interactions of various cultures in Mexico and the United States, which, finding if true, most directly support Paredes' argument. Okay, we have Paredes right here arguing that while some Spanish influence is undeniable, Mexican-American folklore is mainly the product of the ongoing interactions of various cultures in Mexico and the United States. Okay, so what would support that? We have option A, the folklore that the ethnographers collected includes several songs written in the form of a decima, a type of poem originating in late 16th century Spain that would not support Paredes' argument. We have B, much of the folklore that the ethnographers collected had similar elements from region to region. That also, I don't believe, would support our claim if we go up. Okay, we are looking for the fact that the folklore is mainly the product of ongoing interactions of various cultures in Mexico and the United States. If we got option C, most of the folklore that the ethnographers collected was previously unknown to scholars. Okay, well, unless these scholars are coming from Spain, I don't know that we could use that. Okay, if we look at our options, it says scholars. Let's scroll up a little bit even more. Okay, we've got scholars such as Aurelio Espinosa claim that it derived largely from Spain. Okay, I don't think that that would be supported either. Okay, because it doesn't look like it's necessarily exclusive that the scholars are all from Spain. We have D. Most of the folklore that the ethnographers collected consisted of burritos, ballads about history and social life of a clearly recent origin. Okay, well, that would make sense with our claim, because our claim is that it's the product of ongoing interaction, so current and recent interactions of various cultures in Mexico and the United States. So D, that most of the folklore that the ethnographers collected consisted of corridos, ballads about history and social life of a clearly recent origin, would probably make the most sense there. In the early 19th century, some Euro-American farmers in the northeastern United States used agricultural techniques developed by the Haudenosaunee Iroquois people centuries earlier, but it seems that few of the farmers had actually seen Haudenosaunee farms firsthand. Barring the possibility of several farmers of the same era independently developing techniques that the Haudenosaunee people had already invented, these facts most strongly suggest that what? Well, I would imagine it would suggest that the Haudenosaunee farms and Euro-American farmers sort of interacted at some point in order for these techniques? Yes, for these techniques to sort of cross over. So we have option A, those farmers learn the techniques from other people who were more directly influenced by Haudenosaunee practices. That would probably what most logically completes the text. Okay, unless we were stating somewhere earlier that they never interact directly with each other. So barring the possibility of several farmers of the same era independently developing techniques suggests that, yeah, it would seem that this would be possibly a little bit of a stretch, since it's saying that they didn't meet directly. But if none of these other options would state that they meet directly, then we could go back to A. So we have option B. The crops typically cultivated by Euro-American farmers in the northeastern United States were not well suited to Haudenosaunee farming techniques. No. C. Haudenosaunee farming techniques were widely used in regions outside of the northeastern United States. No. D. Euro-American farmers only began to recognize the benefits of Haudenosaunee farming techniques late in the 19th century. That wouldn't make sense. Okay, it would have to suggest that those farmers learned the techniques from other people who are more directly influenced by their practices, okay? Since it doesn't look like it's possible for them to have learned it themselves, which I'm going to go back to the text and actually check if it states that. So we have in the early 19th century, some Euro-American farmers in the northeastern United States used agricultural practices developed by the Iroquois people centuries earlier, but it seems that few of those farmers had actually seen these farms firsthand. So some of them did. Okay, so we actually we've already stated that it's been direct. And then down here with A, those farmers learned the techniques from other people who were more directly influenced by Haudenosaunee practices, which could be those who had direct contact, or it could also be other people who had made contact and are now making contact with the American farmer. So A would be perfect for 17. If some artifacts recovered from excavations of the settlement of Kulokata in modern Ghana date from the 13th century CE, that may lend credence to the claims that the settlement was founded before or around that time. There is other evidence, however, strongly supporting a 14th century CE founding date for Kulokata. If both the artifact dates and the 14th century CE founding dates are correct, that would imply what? I'm going to assume that it would probably be that these artifacts were stolen or taken or from some place that this group conquered. So we have option A, artifacts from the 14th century CE are more commonly recovered than are artifacts from the 13th century CE. Okay, that wouldn't make sense. We've got B. Going back, we've got B. The artifacts originated elsewhere and eventually reached Kulokata through trade or migration. Yeah, or conquering. Okay, so B looks really good. Let's take a look at C and D. Kulokata was founded by people from a different region than had previously been assumed. That wouldn't make sense. D, excavations at Kulokata may have inadvertently damaged some artifacts dating to 14th century CE. No, they'd have to have been brought in through trade or migration or maybe some other method like conquering. I don't know anything about like these groups, but I'm just stating that because I think maybe it could happen. A team of biologists led by Jae Hoon Jung, Antonio D. Barboza, and Stephanie Houghton investigated the mechanism that allows Arabidopsis thaliana tall cress plants to accelerate flowering at high temperatures. They replaced the protein ELF3 in the plants with a similar protein found in another species, stiff brome, that unlike A. thaliana displays no acceleration in flowering with increased temperature. All right, so they're replacing this protein in the plant with a similar protein found in another species. If we go on, a comparison of unmodified A. thaliana plants with the altered plants showed no difference in flowering at 22 degrees Celsius, but at 27 degrees Celsius, the unmodified plants exhibited accelerated flowering while the altered ones did not, which suggests what? Okay, so keep in mind that the A. Thaliana plants accelerate flowering at high temperatures. So the fact that there's no difference at 22 degrees Celsius would make sense. Now, once we get into higher temperatures, that's where you would expect that accelerated flowering to occur. And it does in the unmodified plants, but in the modified one, which lack the ELF3 protein, it does not. So that'd be the key difference there. We have option A, temperature sensitive accelerated flowering is unique to A. Thaliana. Well, no, we never state that. B, A. Thaliana increases EL production as temperatures rise. Well, we never really talk about the production levels here. Okay, so B wouldn't really make sense. So I'll keep that as sort of one slash mark for now. If we look at C, ELF3 enables A. Thaliana to respond to increased temperatures. Okay, well, this would be perfect because we know that at 22 degrees Celsius, it wouldn't really make a difference because it states that ELF3 really only matters once you get into high temperatures, right? The accelerated flowering should only occur at high temperatures. So the 22 degrees Celsius really doesn't matter. But then at 27 degrees Celsius, we see that the unmodified plant does have that accelerated flowering, but the one that is modified to lack ELF3 does not. So ELF3 then must be required, or in other words, it enables A. Thaliana to respond to that increased temperatures. Okay, if we take a look at D, temperatures of at least 22 degrees Celsius are required for it to flower. We never state that that's required for it to flower. Okay, we know that at 27 degrees Celsius, that accelerated flowering takes place, but we don't know that it requires at least 22 degrees Celsius to flower sort of at a normal rate. So our answer would have to be C. Question 20, it looks like we're on the writing section now because we've got all these different forms of provide. We're asked which choice completes the text that conforms to the conventions of standard English. A member of the Cherokee Nation, Mary Golda Ross, is renowned for her contributions to NASA's planetary flight book, which is going to refer back to the planetary flight book, blank detailed mathematical guidance for missions to Mars and Venus. Okay, we'd have to have provided past tense there, okay, because ultimately we are dealing with the past tense. Okay, it's not having provided or to provide. This would be in the infinitive. Okay, it's not providing, it would just be provided. So our answer there would have to be answer choice A. Typically, underlines, scribbles, and notes left in the margins by a former owner lowers a book's value. Okay, so that's ultimately going to be an independent clause. When the former owner is a famous poet like Walt Whitman, such markings known as marginalia can be a gold mine to literary scholars. Okay, so that's a contrast. Okay, so we start with one statement, then we contrast that. So something like but would make sense. Okay, what we have after that is also an independent clause. Okay, because we have such markings can be a gold mine to literary scholars. Okay, so we got to connect those. We can get rid of B. We can get rid of C as well. If we look at the difference between D and A, okay, we need to have that comma in but. Sorry, that should be an X, not a circle. Okay, we need to have that comma in but because we are connecting those two independent clauses. After the United Kingdom began rolling out taxes equivalent to a few cents on single-use plastic grocery bags in 2011, plastic bag consumption decreased by up to 90%. Blank taxes or such taxes are subject to what economists are called the rebound effect. As the change became normalized, plastic bag use started to creep back up. All right, so we see here that we've got two independent clauses. Okay, so we have all these options here. Such taxes, we would ultimately want to refer back to the 90 taxes. Okay, we can get rid of B because we know that that's going to be a run-on. Then if we look at the other differences, we need to have some punctuation, like I said, otherwise we're going to end up with a run-on. So now it would be between A and D, or A and C. Okay, so the big question here is whether or not such taxes can stand on its own. So we have such taxes are subject to what economists call the rebound effect. As the change became normalized, plastic bag use started to creep back up. All right, so that's going to be an independent clause on its own. We can't just connect that with only a comma. We'd have to have a period. So our answer there would have to be C for 22. As British scientist Peter Wibberley has observed, the Earth is not a very good timekeeper. Earth's slightly irregular rotation rate means that measurements of time must be periodically adjusted. Specifically, an extra leap second, the 86,401 first second of the day is blank time is added. Okay, is added whenever time. Okay, that can't be split up into two sentences, I don't think. Whenever time is based on the planet's rotation, lags. Whenever time based on the planet's rotation lags a full 9/10 of a second behind time kept by precise atomic clocks. Okay, so an extra leap second is added whenever time. Okay, so that can't be split up into two sentences. We can get rid of C. We can also get rid of B as well there. If we take a look at the differences between A and D, okay, we can't split this up into a comma, or we can't split this up with a comma. It needs to remain together because we're specifically talking about when it's getting added, right? We state that an extra leap second is added whenever right? We can't just stop after an extra leap second. Okay. We can't have that comma there. This is essential. It's not non-essential. It needs to remain together. There's no reason that you should have any sort of punctuation between the two. Okay. So our answer would have to be D. Question 24. And I want to make a quick note that on the writing section, okay, if you glance at your answer choices before you start the question, which I do recommend that you do, make sure that if you come across one where you have the same base word, in this case, it's enhance. Okay, just understand that going in, and then you can start reading. So we have 24. Bengali author Toru Dutz's A Sheaf Gleaned in French Fields, 1876, a volume of English translations of French poems. That's not essential, so I'm just going to get rid of that in this context because we don't need it. Okay, so Bengali author Toru Dutz's A Sheaf Gleaned in French Fields, blank scholars' understanding of the transnational multilingual contest in which Dutt lived and worked. Okay, well, we know that it's a singular work, okay? His Dutt's, we could just pretty much replace this with book. It's singular. So since it's singular, we can get rid of are, okay? Because you could think they are, it would be he is, okay? They have, it would be he has. So we can get rid of both of those because they're plural, and we know we have singular. So then we're dealing between present tense and past tense. We know that this is in the past, okay? So we can get rid of D, and our answer would have to be A. Journalists have dubbed Gil Scott-Heron the Godfather of Rap, a title that has appeared in hundreds of articles about him since the 1990s. Scott-Heron himself resisted the Godfather nickname, okay? So I'll just mark that as N for nickname. However, feeling that it didn't encapsulate his devotion to the broader African-American blues music tradition, as well as bluesologist, the moniker he preferred. Okay, well, from feeling on, that's a supplementary phrase. However is a supplementary adverb. Okay, so we can't use a semicolon because, like I said, we don't have an independent clause. We have a supplementary phrase, so we can't split that up with any sort of semicolon. So then we'd be between A and C. From here, we can take a look at our endings. That's the only difference. So do we need a comma after however? We would have to have a comma after however, and the reason is we have this supplementary phrase from feeling onward. Okay, we have the main clause which ends after nickname, and then we have the supplementary adverb. So since we're splitting up the main clause from the supplementary phrase that comes after it, and we have the supplementary adverb, we have to have a comma after however as well, since we have that supplementary phrase coming after the word however too. Okay, so our answer would have to be C for 25. From afar, African-American fiber artist Bisa Butler's portraits look like paintings. They're depictions of human faces, bodies, and clothing so intricate that it seems only a fine brush could have rendered them. When viewed up close, however, the portraits reveal themselves to be quilts. Okay, so that's an independent clause. Then we have the stitching barely visible among the thousands of pieces of printed microcut fabric. All right, well, the stitching is referring back to the quilts. Okay, so this is a supplementary noun phrase because we're referring back to the noun of quilts. When we have a supplementary noun phrase coming after the noun, we can't split it up with a semicolon, a period, or a comma and a fanboy. Okay, we would just use a comma only. Okay, so our answer there would have to be B. And you can get rid of A, C, and D. Most conifers, trees belonging to the phylum Coniferata, are evergreen. That is, they keep their green leaves or needles year-round. However, not all conifer species are evergreen. Large trees lose their needles every fall. All right, so we already have our indication of a contrast here with however, and then we state that not all conifers are evergreen. So we are stating that some of them lose their leaves, and then we're providing an example with large trees. So since we are providing an example there, okay, it wouldn't be at the same time, so we can get rid of that. It wouldn't be in spite of something, okay, so nevertheless wouldn't work, and it's not in addition to something. We are giving an example, so our answer would have to be A, for instance. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Sam Malouf, 1916 to 2009, was an American woodworker and furniture designer. He was the son of Lebanese immigrants. He received a Genius Grant from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation in 1985. The Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, Massachusetts owns a rocking chair that Malouf made from walnut wood. The armrest and the seat of the chair are sleek and contoured, and the back consists of 7 spindle-like slats. The student wants to describe the rocking chair to an audience unfamiliar with Sam Malouf. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Okay, so we need to describe the rocking chair. So if we go back up, okay, we see that we describe the rocking chair mostly right here and right here. Okay, so it's made from walnut wood. The seats and armrests are sleek and contoured, and the back consists of 7 spindle-like slats. So if we go down, let's go ahead and take a look at our options. We have option A, with its sleek, contoured armrests and seat. The walnut rocking chair in Boston Museum's Fine Arts is just one piece of furniture created by American woodworker Sam Malouf. So we do touch on the contoured armrests and seats as well as what it is made out of. So that one looks like it could be good. Let's take a look at our other options. We got B, Sam Malouf was born in 1916, died in 2009. During his life, he made a chair that you can see. That doesn't really describe it. We have C, furniture designer was a recipient. Once again, we don't describe the actual chair. And then D, the rocking chair is made from walnut and has been shaped such that its armrests and seat are sleek and contoured. Okay, so we know that we want to describe the rocking chair to an audience unfamiliar with Sam Malouf. Okay, well, that means we would also want to introduce Sam Malouf. So saying with its sleek contoured armrests and seat, the walnut rocking chair in Boston's Museum of Fine Arts is just one piece of furniture created by American woodworker Sam Maloof. Okay, that's providing pretty much all the same information that D provides, except it adds on who Sam Maloof is, and also the description of the fact that it's in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. So A is a much, much better description of the rocking chair to an audience unfamiliar with Sam Maloof. So our answer would have to be A. While researching a topic, a student is taking the following notes. In the late 1890s, over 14,000 unique varieties of apples were grown in the U.S., and the rise of industrial agriculture in the mid-1900s narrowed the range of commercially grown crops. Thousands of apple varieties considered less suitable for commercial growth were lost. Today, only 15 apple varieties dominate the market, making up 90% of apples purchased in the U.S. The Lost Apple Project, based in Washington State, attempts to find and grow lost apple varieties. The student wants to emphasize the decline in unique apple varieties in the U.S. and specify why this decline occurred. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Option A, Lost Apple Project is dedicated to finding some of the apple varieties lost following a shift in agricultural practices in the mid-1900s. Well, we want to emphasize the decline in the varieties in the U.S. and then specify why it occurs. A doesn't really specify or doesn't emphasize the decline in varieties, so we can get rid of A. B, well, over 14,000 apple varieties were grown in the U.S. in the late 1890s. Only 15 unique varieties make up most of the apples sold today. Okay, well, we're not specifying why that decline occurred. Okay, always make sure you're addressing all parts of the prompt, which B does not. C, since the rise of industrial agriculture, U.S. farmers have mainly grown the same few unique apple varieties, resulting in the loss of thousands of varieties less suitable for commercial growth. Okay, well, that addresses all of our points, the decline in unique apple varieties in the U.S. and why it occurred. So C looks perfect. We'll take a quick look at D. As industrial agriculture rose to prominence in the mid-1900s, the number of crops selected for cultivation decreased dramatically. Okay, C will have to be our answer there. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Cecilia Visuana is a multidisciplinary artist. In 1971, her first solo art exhibition, Pinturas, Poemas y Exposiciones, was shown at the Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes in Santiago, Chile. Her poetry collection was published in 1983 by Tanem Press. Her poetry collection Instan was published in 2002 by Kelsey St. Press. She lives part-time in Chile, where she was born, and part-time in New York. All right, so a student wants to introduce the artist's 1983 poetry collection. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish school? All right, so introduce the poetry collection from 1983, which is right here. Okay, so this poetry collection, titled this, published in 1983. All right, so we've got option A. Before she published the works Precarosh and Instan, she exhibited visual art at this museum. Well, that's not really, if we go up, okay, that's not really introducing the poetry. She's just saying before she published this, she did this. We have B, Cecilia is a true multidisciplinary artist whose works include, okay, we're not introducing it, we never even mention it. C, published in 1983 by Tanem Press, Precarosh is a collection of poetry by the multidisciplinary artist Cecilia. That one makes sense. We got D. In 1971, Cecilia exhibited her first solo art exposition. Okay, and then she goes on to state them. But the only one here that's actually introducing the poetry correctly, right, or the poetry collection correctly, here would be answer choice C. Okay, we state pretty much all the information we're given on it, when it was published, who published it, and what it is. It's a collection of poetry by multidisciplinary artist Cecilia V. Suena. So our answer would have to be C. Question 31. While researching a topic, a student is taking the following notes. When medical students mention their patients on social media, they may violate patient confidentiality. Terry Kind led a study to determine how many medical students have student policies that mention social media use. Kind and her team reviewed 132 medical student websites examining publicly available student policies. Only 13 medical schools had guidelines that explicitly mentioned social media, and only 5 defined what constitutes acceptable social media use. The student wants to emphasize the study's methodology. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Option A, student policies of 132 medical schools can be found online. According to research, no. We need to talk about emphasizing the methodology, okay, not just stating a fact. We've got B, to find out how many medical schools have guidelines about student social media use, Terry Kind and her team examined the student policies of 132 medical schools. Okay, well, that does emphasize the study's methodology. We'll see if there's anything that emphasizes it a little bit more. We have C, out of 132 medical schools, only 13 had student policies that mentioned social media. Only 5 specified what use was acceptable. Well, that's not actually emphasizing the methodology, okay? That's just stating a fact and basically what the data was. Then we've got D, Terry Kind and her team wanted to know how many medical schools have student social media policies in place about protecting patient confidentiality. That's not talking about the methodology. The only one here that is emphasizing the methodology would be answer choice B. While researching a topic, a student is taking the following notes. The Gula are a group of African Americans who have lived in parts of southeastern United States since the 18th century. Gula culture is influenced by West African and Central African traditions. Louise Miller Miller Cohen is a Gula historian, storyteller, and preservationist. Then we've got, she founded the Gula Museum of Hilton Head Island, South Carolina in 2003. Vermelle Rodriguez is a Gula historian, artist, and preservationist. She founded the Gula Museum of Georgetown, South Carolina in 2000. All right, the student wants to emphasize the duration and purpose of these two people's work. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information? All right, so emphasize duration and purpose of their work. Okay, so we've got both of them. If we quickly identify what the duration and purpose is. Okay, we've got Louise Miller Cohen is a historian. Okay, she founded this museum in 2003. And then this other person is a historian, same thing, a historian, and founded a different museum in 2003. So both of them founded both of these museums. If we take a quick look up here, okay, the Gula are a group of African Americans who have lived in parts of the southeastern United States since the 18th century. So obviously this has been going on for a long time in terms of duration. As far as duration of Cohen and Rodriguez specifically, it looks like both of them are 2003. So option A, at the Gula Museums in Hilton Head Island and Georgetown, South Carolina, visitors can learn more about the Gula people who have lived in the region for centuries. Okay, so if we go up, emphasize duration and purpose of their work. That's not really discussing the duration of their work. That's just stating the duration of sort of the Gula people who have lived there in the region for centuries. So I'm not really very keen on A. Let's take a look at B. Louis Miller Cohen and Vermelle Rodriguez have worked to preserve the culture of the Gula people who have lived in the United States since the 18th century. Once again, I still don't like the duration there. If we take a look at C, since 2003, Louise Miller Cohen and Vermelle Rodriguez have worked to preserve Gula culture through their museums. Okay, so since 2003, this is emphasizing the duration by stating when they start, and presumably the reader is now in current times. So this has been about 20 years. If we take a look at D, influenced by the traditions of West and Central Africa, Gula culture developed in parts of the southeastern United States in the 18th century. Okay, as you can see with A, B, and D, they're all focused on the duration of the sort of the Gula people rather than the duration that this work has been going on. The only answer choice that focuses on the duration that the work has been going on and emphasizes the purpose of the work is answer choice C. So C would have to be the answer. While researching a topic, a student is taking the following notes. In North America, woodlands have expanded into areas that were once grasslands. Thomas Rogers and F. Leland Russell of Wichita State University investigated whether woodland expansion is related to changes in climate. Rogers and Russell analyzed core samples from oak trees on a site that was not wooded in the past and indexed the age of the trees with historical climate data to see if tree populations and climate were correlated. Tree population growth was associated with dry intervals. Droughts may have played a role in woodland expansion. The student wants to emphasize the aim of the research study. Which choice most effectively uses, and then we got just kind of the generic part there. Okay, so emphasize the aim of the research study. Well, if we go back up, we can identify that aim. Okay, if we go up here, we have they investigated whether woodland expansion is related to changes in climate. Okay, so whether woodland expansion is related to changes in climate. We have option A. Thomas Rogers and Russell, researchers at the university, wanted to know if woodland expansion is related to changes in climate. That's very explicitly emphasized in the aim of the research study. So A looks perfect. Take a quick look at B, C, D. Thanks to the work done by these two people, we now know that droughts may have played a role. That's not emphasizing the aim of the study. We look at C. Have determined tree population growth was associated. We're not focused on the conclusion or any determinations. We're focused on the aim of the study. And then we have D. Analyze core samples. That's describing sort of the methodology. So our answer would have to be answer choice A. Question 1. According to botanists, a viburnum plant experiencing insect damage may develop uranium, a discolored felty growth on its leaf blades. A blank viburnum plant, on the other hand, will have leaves with smooth surfaces and uniformly green coloration. Okay, we see we have a contrast here between this one that is insect damage with a uranium and one that is healthy with smooth surfaces, uniformly green coloration. Okay, so obviously here we would have a blank viburnum plant. Best description there would probably be healthy. See that if we have that as an option now, we've got struggling, which wouldn't make sense. Beneficial, that's not how we would describe a plant. Simple, we wouldn't describe a plant as simple. Healthy, that would be perfect. So our answer would be D. Nigerian-American author Tehu Cole's blank, his two passions, photography and written word, culminates in his 2017 book Blind Spot, which evocatively combines his original photographs from his travels with his poetic prose. All right, well, ultimately here we've got his two passions. Before that, we've got indifference to his two passions. That wouldn't make sense in this context. We know it's culminating in his book, which it then describes as good, right? Evocatively combines these two things. We've got enthusiasm for his two passions. That would make sense. He's not concerned about his two passions. He's not surprised at them. So the answer there would have to be B. Question 3, novelist N.K. Jemisin declines to blank the conventions of the science fiction genre in which she writes, and she has suggested that her readers appreciate her work precisely because of this willingness to thwart expectations and avoid formulaic plots and themes. So she's denying the conventions of the science fiction genre. So she declines to conform to them. Okay, so that'd be answer choice D. It's not perceiving them or reacting to them or questioning them. Okay, she's declining to conform to them or fit the mold that it tries to force her into. She's breaking that mold, or in other words, she declines to conform to that mold or to the conventions of the science fiction genre. So our answer would have to be D. Question 4. In Nature Poem 2017, Kumeyaay poet Tommy Pico portrays his blank the natural world by honoring the centrality of nature within his tribe's traditional beliefs while simultaneously expressing his distaste for being in wilderness settings himself. All right, well, ultimately here, poet Tommy Pico portrays his blank the natural world by honoring, okay, so positive connotation, the centrality of nature within his tribe's traditional beliefs while simultaneously expressing his distaste for being in the wilderness settings himself. So we have this sort of contrast of a positive connotation with a negative connotation. So he both honors nature, but he also has a distaste for the settings he's in. So option A, responsiveness to the natural world, no. B, ambivalence toward, that would make sense. Okay, ambivalence is kind of a neutral feeling, right? You have a positive side and a negative aspect. Okay, so positive and negative aspects, which we do see in this. So that looks very strong. We look at C, renunciation of, he's not rejecting it at all or anything like that. He doesn't have any mastery over it. So it'd have to be B, ambivalence toward. Question 5. The following text is from 1924 poem Cycle by Darnay McNichol, who was a citizen of the Confederate Salish and Kootenai tribes. There shall be new roads wending, a new beating of the drum. Men's eyes shall have fresh seeing. Gray lives reprise their span, but under the new sun's being, completing what night began, there'll be the same backs bending, the same sad feet shall drum when this night finds its ending and day shall have come. Okay, so we have this sort of theme between day and a night. We have this sort of hope for possibly revolution up here. And then we have sort of a resumption to what has always been in the past down here with a negative sort of aspect to it of sort of toil. So we have which choice best states the main purpose of the text. Option A, to consider how the repetitiveness inherent in human life can be both rewarding and challenging. Well, we have the challenging aspect for sure in that second half where we have the toiling. The rewarding aspect in the first half, we can go quickly back up to. There shall be new roads wending. Men's eyes shall have fresh seeing. You could argue that that is rewarding. Gray lives reprise their span. Okay, I think that that's a little bit more on the hope side, but I can see how it could be rewarding as well. We go down to option B. To question whether activities completed at one time of day are more memorable than those completed at another time of day. We're not talking about memorability during different times of days. C, to refute the idea that joy is a more commonly experienced emotion than sadness is. We're not refuting that idea. D, to demonstrate how the experiences of individuals relate to the experiences of their communities. We're not demonstrating that at all. Okay, so our answer would have to be answer choice A. Question 6. The following text is adapted from Jane Austen's 1814 novel, Mansfield Park. The speaker, Tom, is considering staging a play at home with a group of his friends and family. We mean nothing but a little amusement among ourselves just to vary the scene and exercise our powers in something new. We want no audience, no publicity. We may be trusted, I think, in choosing some play most perfectly unexceptionable, and I can conceive no greater harm or danger to any of us in conversing in the elegant written language of some respectable author than in chattering in words of our own. Which choice best states the main purpose of the text? If I were to kind of identify what the main purpose is here, I would probably state that he's trying to convince some adult or maybe like a chaperone or someone in charge of him, basically, to let him perform this play with his friends, sort of in the context, or it sounds like the confines of maybe their own homes or an area they're familiar with. So we have option of A, to offer Tom's assurance that the play will be inoffensive. Okay, we do have support for that because he says that the play will be most perfectly unexceptionable. Okay, so it won't raise any sort of red flags or anything offensive. And then involve only a small number of people. I believe that it says among ourselves. Yep, among ourselves. Okay, so a small group of people would make sense there as well. So A looks really, really strong. Let's go ahead and take a look at B, C, and D. B, to clarify that the play will not be performed in the manner Tom had originally intended. No. C, to elaborate on the idea that the people around Tom lack skills to successfully stage a play. No. And then D, to assert that Tom believes the group performing the play will be able to successfully promote it. This has nothing to do with promotion at all. So our answer there will have to be answer choice A. Musician Joni Mitchell, who is also a painter, uses images she creates for her album covers to emphasize ideas expressed in her music. For the cover of her album Turbulent Indigo 1994, Mitchell painted a striking self-portrait that closely resembles Vincent van Gogh's self-portrait with bandaged ear 1889. The image calls attention to the album's title song, in which Mitchell sings about the legacy of the post-impressionist painter. In that song, Mitchell also hints that she feels a strong artistic connection to Van Gogh, an idea that is reinforced by her imagery on the cover. Which choice best describes the overall structure of the text? Option A, it presents a claim about Mitchell, then gives an example supporting that claim. All right, well, we start out up here by stating that she uses images she creates for her album covers to emphasize ideas expressed in her music, so that is a claim. After that, we have sort of the discussion of her and Van Gogh, basically stating that she's calling attention basically to his work, sort of seeing about the legacy of it. So if we take a look at the second part, then gives an example supporting that claim. Okay, supporting the claim that her album covers emphasize the ideas expressed in her music. Well, we ultimately know that her album cover right here, for the cover of her album, she painted a striking self-portrait that closely resembles Vincent van Gogh's self-portrait with bandaged ear. And then it goes on to state that the image calls attention to the album's title, song, in which Mitchell sings about the legacy of the post-impressionist painter. Okay, yes, that's perfect. So she's presenting the claim that the covers for her album emphasize ideas expressed in her music. We see that illustrated with this Van Gogh example, so our answer would have to be answer choice A. Question 8, text 1. Astronomer Mark Holland and colleagues examined 4 white dwarfs, small dense remnants of past stars, in order to determine the composition of exoplanets that used to orbit those stars. Studying wavelengths of light in the white dwarf atmospheres, the team reported that traces of elements such as lithium and sodium support the presence of exoplanets with continental crusts similar to Earth. Okay, and then we got text 2. I'll actually go down and take a look at what the question's going to be. Based on the text, how would Puturka and Zoo, text 2, most likely characterize a conclusion presented in text 1. Let's quick identify the conclusion in text 1. Okay, if we go up, we see that they examined this in order to determine this. Studying this, the team reported, so this will be the conclusion. Traces of elements such as lithium and sodium support the presence of exoplanets with continental crusts similar to Earth. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at text 2, see how they would characterize that conclusion. Past studies of white dwarf atmospheres have concluded that certain exoplanets had continental crusts. Geologist Keith Puturka and astronomer C.Yi Zhu argued that those studies unduly emphasize atmospheric traces of lithium and other individual elements as signifiers of the types of rock found on Earth. These studies don't adequately account for different minerals made up of various ratios of those elements and the possibility of rock types not found on Earth that contain those minerals. All right, so ultimately, text 1's basically arguing that it supports the presence of exoplanets with continental crusts similar to Earth's, and text 2 stating that it could be similar to other planets is basically what it sounds like. Made of various ratios of those elements, possibility that the rock types not found on Earth that contain those minerals. All right, so we've got option A as how would, based on the text, how would Puturka and Zoo, text 2, most likely characterized conclusion presented in text 1. Option A is as unexpected, because it was widely believed at the time that white dwarf exoplanets lack continental crusts. No, there's no textual support for that. B, as premature, because researchers have only just begun trying to determine what kinds of crusts white dwarf exoplanets have. We don't really state that researchers just began trying to determine this. And then C, as questionable, because it rests on an incomplete consideration of potential sources of the elements detected in white dwarf atmospheres. Yes. Okay, because we ultimately see at the end here in text 2 that it says that the studies don't adequately account for different minerals made up of various ratios of those elements and the possibility of rock types not found on Earth that contain those minerals. Okay, so C has a ton of textual support there, so C makes a lot of sense. We'll take a quick look at D as puzzling because it's unusual to successfully detect lithium and sodium when analyzing wavelengths of light in white dwarf atmospheres. Okay, that doesn't have any textual support, so our answer would have to be answer choice C. Question 9. Utah is home to Pando, a colony of about 47,000 quaking aspen trees that all share a single root system. Pando is one of the largest single organisms by mass on Earth, but ecologists are worried that its growth is declining in part because of grazing by animals. The ecologists say that strong fences could prevent deer from eating young trees and help Pando start thriving again. According to the text, why are ecologists concerned about Pando? Well, it says up here, ecologists are worried that its growth is declining in part because of grazing by animals. We have option A, it isn't growing at the same rate it used to, so growth is declining, so that would make sense. That's not very specific though, so I'll keep reading on. B, it isn't producing young trees anymore. It doesn't say that anywhere. C, it can't grow into new areas because it is blocked by fences. We're talking about possibly discussing or introducing strong fences to prevent the deer from eating the trees, but it's not because of the fences themselves. D, its root system can't support many more new trees. It doesn't say that anywhere, so our answer would have to be answer choice A. The reason that I wasn't 100% sure on it at first is pretty much just because it's not super specific, right? Ecologists are worried that its growth is declining in part because of grazing by animals, so I was wondering if there's going to be a choice that mentioned maybe both answer choice A of it's not growing at the same rate it used to because of grazing by animals, but in this case, answer choice A would be perfect, right? It's ultimately stating that they're worried about it. Why? Because it's growing not at the same rate it used to. It's growing at a decreasing. Its growth is declining. Okay, so our answer would have to be A. Question 10. For many years, the only existing fossil evidence of Mixtoporid, an extinct family of large aquatic arthropods known as sea scorpions and related to modern arachnids and horseshoe crabs, came from 4 species living on the paleocontinent of Laurasia. Now, if you are doing the reading section and you see something big like this, it's non-essential because it's between 2 M dashes, so it can be helpful to sort of get rid of it, but obviously you still need to consider it when going through answers, but it can be helpful to get rid of it just for simplicity purposes of reading. So if we start from the top now, for many years, the only existing fossil evidence of Mixtoporid euripids came from 4 species living on the paleocontinent of Laurasia. In a discovery that expands our understanding of the geographical distribution of mixtoperids, paleontologist Bo Wang and others have identified fossilized remains of a new mixtoperid species, TX, that lived over 400 million years ago on the paleocontinent of Gondwana. According to the text, why was Wang and his team's discovery of TX fossil significant? Okay, well, we see that in a discovery that expands our understanding. Okay, so this is basically describing why it's significant then of the geographical distribution of mixtoperids. Okay, so it's because it expands our understanding of the geographical distribution of mixtoperids. We see that it goes on to state that they have them on the paleocontinent of Gondwana. Previously, it looks like they had them only on the paleocontinent of Rhodea. Okay, so that would be the significance there. We have option A, the fossil constitutes the first evidence found by scientists that they lived more than 400 years ago. No, you need to focus on the geographical distribution. We have B, fossil helps establish that mixtoperids are more closely related to modern anarchids and horseshoe crabs than previously thought. No, we need to focus on geographical distribution. C, fossil helps establish a more accurate timeline of the evolution of mixtoperids on the paleocontinents of L and G. No, we need to focus on geographical distribution. And then D, fossil constitutes the first evidence found by scientists that mixtoperids existed outside the paleocontinent of Laurasia. Yes, this is the first evidence that they existed outside of that continent. That's focusing on the geographical distribution to Gondwana, so our answer has to be D. Question 11. The novelist Toni Morrison was the first Black woman to work as an editor at the publishing company Random House from 1967 to 1983. A scholar asserts that one of Morrison's likely aims during her time as an editor was to strengthen the presence of Black writers in the list of Random House's published authors, which finding, if true, would most strongly support the scholar's claim. Okay, keep in mind the claim is that one of Morrison's likely aims during her lifetime or during her time as an editor was to strengthen the presence of Black writers on the list of Random House's published authors. We have option A. The percentage of authors published by Random House who were Black rose in the early 1970s and stabilized throughout the decade. We know that she's hired from 67 to 83, so it rising in the early 70s would support the claim that she was trying to bring in more Black authors and get them published. So that would make sense there. I'll put a check by it for now. We'll go ahead and look at B, C, and D. B, Black authors who were interviewed in the 1980s and 90s were highly likely to cite Toni Morrison's novels as a principal influence on their work. Well, her being an influence isn't directly supporting the fact that she's trying to get them published more often. If you look at C, the novels written by Toni Morrison that were published after 1983 sold significantly more copies and received wider critical acclaim than the novels she wrote that were published before 1983. Once again, that's not supporting the fact that during her time there, she is pushing to get more books that are written by Black authors published. We look at D. Works that were edited by Toni Morrison during her time at Random House displayed stylish characteristics that distinguish them from the works that were not edited by Morrison. Once again, okay, the only answer here that is providing support for the fact that she tried to get more Black authors published is answer choice A. So A would have to be our answer there. Question 12. The poet Walt Whitman is an 1887 essay by Jose Marti, a Cuban author and political activist, originally written in Spanish. In the essay, Marti explores the value of literature, arguing that a society's spiritual well-being depends on the character of its literary culture. Which quotation from a translation of the poet Walt Whitman most effectively illustrates the claim? Okay, keep in mind you always need to understand your claim when you're asked about the claim. In this case, the claim is that a society's spiritual well-being depends on the character of its literary culture. We have option A, poetry, which brings together or separates, which fortifies or brings anguish, which shores up or demolishes souls. Okay, souls is going to be very representative of spiritual well-being. Okay, so that's something I want to pay attention to. Which gives or robs men of faith, also spiritual and vigor, is more necessary to a people than industry itself, for industry provides them with a means of subsistence, while literature gives them the desire and strength for life. So obviously this is very spiritual. Now we also need to pay attention to the second half, which is it depends on the character of its literary culture. Okay, we're starting out by talking about poetry, bringing together, separates, fortifies, or brings anguish. Okay, and then continue on with poetry, while literature gives them the desire and strength for life. So obviously A right there fits all of that claim and supports it. So our answer would have to be answer choice A for number 12. Question 13, we have estimates of Tyrannosaurid bite force, study year estimation method, approximate bite force in newtons. The largest Tyrannosaurids, the family of carnivorous dinosaurs that includes TA and most famously T-Rex, are thought to have had the strongest bites of land animals in Earth's history. Determining the bite force of extinct animals can be difficult. However, and paleontologists Paul Barrett and Emily Rayfield have suggested that an estimate of dinosaur bite force may be significantly influenced by the methodology used in generating that estimate. Which choice best describes data from the table that support Barrett and Rayfield's suggestion? Okay, so their suggestion is right here. Okay, that an estimate of dinosaur bite force may be significantly influenced by the methodology used in generating the estimate. Let's take a look at our data. Okay, so we have the estimation method. We have first three are all different. This fourth one is the same as the first one. And then we have the approximate bite force. Okay, so we have the lowest one here, and then we have highest one here, which is obviously very different than the lowest, 8,000 to 235,000. And then we have these two, which are the same method, muscular and skeletal modeling are roughly the same. They're very, very close. So let's go and look at our options. We have option A, the study by Mears used body mass scaling and produced the lowest estimated maximum bite force, while the study by Costa L used muscular and skeletal modeling and produced the highest estimated maximum. Okay, well, that even if that's true, according to the data, that's not going to support really our suggestion, okay? Because we can't just state that it's the lowest estimated maximum and then highest estimated maximum, because if those two values are super close to each other, then it wouldn't matter, right? Because if I have a mean or a median of like 5 and I'm stating that it's like 4.5 and 5.5 are the minimum maximum, that's obviously not great. That's not significant differences, right? And we need it to be significantly influenced here. So that doesn't look good. Let's go and take a look at B. In their study, Gignac and Erickson used tooth-bone interaction analysis to produce an estimated bite force range with a minimum of 8,000, maximum 34,000. That's not getting compared to any other estimation method, so we can't use that. We can take a look at C and D now. C, we've got the bite force estimates produced by Bates and Falkingham and by Costa L were similar to each other, while the estimates produced by Mears and by Gignac and Erickson each differed substantially from any other estimate. And then let's compare that to D. D says the estimated maximum bite force produced by Costa L exceeded the estimated maximum bite force by Bates and Falkingham, even though both groups of researchers use the same method to generate their estimates. Well, that's not talking about that big difference when using two different methods to estimate bite force. So let's go back to C. We got the bite force estimates produced by Bates and Falkingham and by Costa L. So let's go up. Okay, Costa L and Bates and Falkingham both use muscular and skeletal modeling, so it makes sense that those are similar. Then we have, well, the estimates produced by Mears and by Gignac and Erickson each differed substantially from any other estimate. Okay, we see that that's true as well. Okay, so C looks really strong there. I will quickly touch on it since none of these actually ended up giving sort of the metrics, why A has to be wrong as well there. So we have the study by Mears used body mass scaling. Okay, we see Mears did use body mass scaling, while the study by Costa L used muscular and skeletal modeling and produced the highest estimated maximum. Okay, so ultimately we're claiming here that Costa L produced highest maximum. That's not true. Okay, the Costa L one produced 63,000. Okay, Mears was the one that actually had the highest estimated maximum. So that wouldn't make sense there. It's just not factually accurate according to the data. So we can get rid of A based on that. So our answer would have to be answer choice C. Question 14, number and origin of clamshell tools found at different levels below the surface in Neanderthal cave. We've got the depth of tools found below the surface in cave in meters. We've got clamshells that Neanderthals collected from the beach, clamshells that Neanderthals collected from the seafloor. All right, so we've got studying tools unearthed at a cave site on the western coast of Italy. Archaeologist Paula Villa and colleagues have determined that prehistoric Neanderthal groups fashioned them from shells of clams that they harvested from the seafloor while wading or diving, or that washed up on the beach. Clam shells become thin and eroded as they wash up on the beach, while those on the seafloor are smooth and sturdy, so the research team suspects that Neanderthals prized the tools made with seafloor shells. However, the team also concluded that those tools were likely more challenging to obtain, noting that, and then we have to effectively use data from the table to support the conclusion. Okay, well, what's the conclusion? We have right here that those tools, referring to seafloor shells, were likely more challenging to obtain. All right, let's take a look at the data. So we've got our depths here, clam shells. I see that all of these values in this right column is less than the left column. Okay, so there are less clamshells that are harvested from the seafloor than from the beach, even though it said that the seafloor ones are more useful. So you'd expect them to try harder to get the seafloor ones. So presumably then, go down to our conclusion, right? The seafloor tools are likely more challenging to obtain. That would make sense since there are less of them, even though they're more useful. They would have to be harder to obtain in order for that logic to make sense. We have option A. At each depth below the surface in the cave, the difference in the number of tools of each type suggests that shells were easier to collect from the beach than to harvest from the seafloor. Yes, we can take a quick look at B, C, and D as well, just to show you why those are wrong. So B, highest number of tools were at a depth of 3 to 4 meters below the surface. Okay, we can take a quick look at if that's even true. We see it is. Okay, we can keep reading. Which suggests the Neanderthal population at the site was highest during the related period of time. That's not supporting our conclusion though, so we can get rid of B. C, at each depth below the surface in the cave, the difference in the number of tools of each type suggests that Neanderthals preferred to use clam shells from the beach because of their durability. No, it's because they're easier to get to. D, the higher number of tools at depths of 5 to 6 meters below the surface in the cave than at depths 4 to 5 meters below the surface suggests that the size of the clam populations change over time. That's not supporting our conclusion. Our answer there has to be answer choice A. Question 15, average number and duration of torpor bouts and arousal episodes for Alaska marmots and Arctic ground squirrels, 2008 to 2011. While hibernating, Alaska marmots and Arctic ground squirrels enter a state called torpor, which minimizes the energy their bodies need to function. Often a hibernating animal will temporarily come out of torpor, called an arousal episode, and its metabolic rate will rise, burning more of the precious energy the animals need to survive the winter. Alaska marmots hibernate in groups and therefore burn less energy, keeping warm during these episodes than they would if they were alone. A researcher hypothesized that because Arctic ground squirrels hibernate alone, they would likely exhibit longer bouts of torpor and shorter arousal episodes than Alaska marmots. Which choice best describes data from the table that supports the researcher's hypothesis? Okay, keep in mind the hypothesis is that Arctic ground squirrels hibernate alone. They would likely exhibit longer bouts of torpor, shorter arousal than marmots. Okay, so we have ground squirrels here. Their torpor bouts are less than marmots, which is the opposite of what we would expect. And then we have arousal episodes. We're talking about, I believe, duration and not frequency. Let me go back down just to take a look. Okay, it said that they would likely exhibit longer bouts of torpor, shorter arousal episodes. Okay, so we're concerned with duration rather than frequency here. Okay, so let's actually erase that. We're concerned with duration. Okay, they hypothesized that there would be longer torpor bouts, shorter arousal duration as well there. So as we can see, that is the case according to the data. So let's go ahead and take a look at our answer choices. We have option A. The Alaskan marmot's arousal episodes lasted 4 days, while the Arctic ground squirrel's arousal episodes lasted less than a day. We need to also touch on the torpor as well in order to support this. We've got B, Alaskan marmots and Arctic ground squirrels both maintain torpor for several consecutive days per bout on average. C, Alaskan marmots had shorter torpor bouts and longer arousal episodes than the Arctic ground squirrels did. Okay, we know that that part is true. Okay, so we can go ahead and put a check there. We can get rid of A. Let's go ahead and take a look at D. Alaskan marmots had more torpor bouts than arousal episodes. We're not concerned with the frequency. We're concerned with the duration, right? If we go up, it's about shorter and longer bouts. So once again, concerned with duration, not frequency. Answer there has to be answer choice C. Question 16, ratified by more than 90 countries, the Nagoya Protocol is an international agreement ensuring that indigenous communities are compensated when their agricultural resources and knowledge of wild plants and animals are utilized by agricultural corporations. However, the protocol has shortcomings. For example, it allows corporations to insist that their agreements with communities to conduct research on the commercial uses of the community's resources and knowledge remain confidential. Therefore, some indigenous advocates express concern that the protocol may have the unintended effect of option A, diminishing the monetary reward that corporations might derive from their agreements with indigenous communities. Well, that's not what indigenous advocates would say. That'd be what corporate advocates would say. B, limiting the research that corporations conduct on the resources of the indigenous communities with which they have signed agreements. Well, it's not going to limit the research. We got C, preventing independent observers from determining whether the agreements guarantee equitable compensation for indigenous communities. Okay, that would be what an advocate would say. They would want fair compensation for the indigenous communities. So C looks good. We'll take a look at D. Discouraging indigenous communities from learning new methods for harvesting plants and animals from their corporate partners. No. Answer would have to be answer choice C. It's the only one that would logically complete that text. Question 17, the domestic sweet potato, IB, descends from a wild plant native to South America. It also populates the Polynesian islands, where evidence confirms that native Hawaiians and other indigenous peoples were cultivating the plant centuries before seafaring first occurred over the thousands of miles of ocean separating them from South America. To explain how the sweet potato was first introduced in Polynesia, botanist Pablo Muanez Rodriguez and colleagues analyzed the DNA of numerous varieties of the plant, concluding that Polynesian varieties diverged from South American ones over 100,000 years ago. Given that Polynesia was peopled only in the last 3,000 years, the team concluded that, and then which choice most logically completes it? Option A, the cultivation of the sweet potato in Polynesia likely predates its cultivation in South America. Okay, well, that's not supported, okay, because ultimately, if we go up, okay, it says that populates Polynesian islands where evidence confirms native Hawaiians and indigenous people were cultivating the plant centuries before seafaring first occurred over thousands of miles of ocean separating them from South America. Okay, so in South America, right here, concluding that Polynesian varieties diverged from South American ones over 100,000 years ago. So the South American ones already existed, and so did the Polynesian ones, okay, even though people hadn't gotten to Polynesia yet. So it was already on Polynesia before people are there. Option A, stating that the cultivation of the sweet potato in Polynesia predates its cultivation in South America, there's not any support for that, so we can get rid of A. If we look at B, Polynesian peoples likely acquired the sweet potato from South American peoples only within the last 3,000 years. We know that that's not true because it states basically that the sweet potato is already there in Polynesia before people get there, or before people are there. And then C, human activity likely played no role in the introduction in the sweet potato in Polynesia. Yes, okay, it's stating it's already there because it states that people formed there 3,000 years ago. But that the DNA from the sweet potato is already there from 100,000 years ago, right? It diverged from the South American potatoes 100,000 years ago. And then D, Polynesian sweet potato varieties likely descend from a single South American variety that was domesticated, not wild. No, it would have to originate in Polynesia. So answer there would have to be answer choice C. Question 18, atoms in a synchrotron, a type of circular particle accelerator, travel faster and faster until they something to do with reach a desired energy level, at which point they are diverted to collide with a target. All right, well, we have travel as one of our verbs. We also have are diverted. Both of those are going to be present tense. So we know we have to have present tense here as well. So our answer would have to be until they reach. So our answer would be B. Question 19. Even though bats prefer very sweet nectar, the plants that attract them have evolved to produce nectar that is only moderately sweet. A recent study, and then we have something to explain. So explains why making sugar is energy intensive and is more advantageous for plants to make a large amount. Okay, so we've got a recent study explains why that would just have to be explains. Okay, that one's pretty simple. We just need to have the finite verb there. Okay, explains, keep it present tense. Okay, we can't have it in another tense, and so there would have to be answer choice A. Question 20. Former First Lady of the United States Eleanor Roosevelt, an Indian activist and educator Hansa Mehta were instrumental in drafting the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document that, and then we have something to do with outlines, the basic freedoms to which all people are entitled. So a document here is singular, so we can get rid of A and B because they are both for plural. And then we're between C and D. Now, as you can see, they're in the same tense, just different number. Okay, a document is singular. A way that you can tell which one would be singular is you could do he versus they. Okay, so you would say they outline, but you would say he outlines. Okay, since we are singular, we would have to be outlines. So our answer there would have to be answer choice C. Question 21. The lifespan of rockfish vary greatly by species. For instance, the colorful coleophyte rockfish can survive for a little over a decade. So that's an independent clause ending at decade. Well, the rough-eye rockfish boasts a maximum lifespan of about 2 centuries. That is not an independent clause. Okay, so we would not connect that with a semicolon, so we can get rid of A. We can also take a look at B. Once again, not an independent clause here. And then C, once again, not an independent clause here. Okay, we use that comma to connect that dependent clause from well on into this independent clause. Our answer would have to be D. Question 22. The Lion light system, developed by Kenyan inventor Richard Turir, consists of LED lights installed around the perimeter of livestock pastures, powered with energy collected by solar panels. Okay, energy collected by solar panels. That should not have a comma between it. Okay, energy, powered by energy, powered with energy. The blinking LEDs keep lions away at night. Okay, it needs to be energy collected by solar panels. This is not non-essential. Okay, so we can get rid of D as well. Now we'd be between B and C. It looks like the difference here would be a comma at the end of this. So let's take a look by starting from the beginning of the sentence, or at least this part. Okay, so we'll start from the beginning. The Lion light system developed by Kenyan inventor Richard Turir. That's not essential. So the Lion light system consists of LED lights installed around the perimeter of livestock pastures, powered with energy collected by solar panels during the day, is going to then be an introductory modifier to the blinking LED. So it would need a comma after it. So our answer would have to be answer choice C. Question 23. Materials scientist Marie Agathe Charpin and her colleagues believed they could improve on the multi-component alloy NiCoCr in equal proportions mixture of nickel, cobalt, and chromium by replacing chromium with ruthenium, Ru. Okay, so keep in mind we want to maintain this parallelism, right? We've got Ru. Okay, we've got that in all these choices. But the alloy that resulted turned out to be an unsuitable replacement. All right, so that would be but because we have a contrast. Okay, so I would use a but there. Now, do we need a comma or do we not need a comma? Well, we have the alloy that resulted turned out to be an unsuitable replacement for NiCoCr. Well, that is an independent clause by itself. So therefore, we'd have to have a comma in the fanboy. So our answer would have to be D. Question 24. The progressive era in the United States witnessed the rise of numerous black women's clubs, local organizations that advocated for racial and gender equality. Among the club's leaders, blank Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, founder of the Women's Era Club of Boston. Okay, well, among the club's leaders, and then we have Joseph St. Pierre Ruffin. So this is going to be singular. So our subject is ultimately Josephine. Okay, so we have singular, therefore were is off the table because that's plural. Same with are and have. Those are all plural. We know our subject is singular, so our answer has to be answer choice A. Question 25. Based on genetic evidence, archaeologists have generally agreed that reindeer domestication began in the 11th century CE. However, since uncovering fragments of a 2,000-year-old reindeer training harness in northern Siberia, okay, well, this is an introductory modifier, modifying whatever comes after it. Okay, that cannot be domestication because domestication could not have uncovered these fragments. The argument researcher Robert Losey has made also could not have uncovered them. Researcher Robert Losey has argued, okay, this is the subject there, so that would make sense. The subject cannot be his argument. Okay, the subject would have to be the researcher himself because he's the only one of these options that can actually make this uncovering of the fragments. Okay, so our answer would have to be answer choice A. Question 26. Higra is an archaeological site in present-day Saudi Arabia and was the second largest city of the Nabatean Kingdom, 4th century BCE to 1st century CE. Archaeologist Layla Neem recently traveled to Higra to study its ancient tombs. Built into the outcrops of a vast desert, these burial chambers seem to blend seamlessly with nature. So we start out with an independent clause after tombs. Okay, so up to tombs is an independent clause. Then we have built into the rocky outcrops of a vast desert, these burial chambers. We have an introductory modifier, and then we have another independent clause in these burial chambers, which is our subject, seem to blend seamlessly with nature. Okay, so two independent clauses we're connecting. We also have this introductory modifier starting at built. So to connect these two, we can't just use a comma unless we had one of the fanboys. We can't have nothing. Okay, so we would have to split this up into two sentences. So our answer would have to be answer choice A. Question 27. When external forces are applied to common glass made from silicates, energy builds up around minuscule defects in the material, resulting in fractures. Recently, engineer Erkka Frankberg of Tampere University in Finland used the chemical compound aluminum oxide. Okay, so we can't have aluminum oxide be non-essential. That needs to be in here. Aluminum oxide to make a glassy solid that can withstand higher strain than silicate glass before fracturing. Okay, this cannot be split with a comma. This just needs to be all one. Okay, we can't have commas anywhere here. Okay, so our answer would have to be answer choice D. Nothing is non-essential in this case. We don't need to split anything up. Okay, we just go straight through, no punctuation. Answer's got to be D. Question 28. Etched into Peru's Nazca Desert are line drawings so large that they can only be fully seen from high above. Archaeologists have known of these lines since the 1920s when a researcher spotted some from a nearby foothill, and they've been studying the markings ever since. Then we have some transition. Archaeologists' efforts are aided by drones that capture high-resolution aerial photographs of the lines. Okay, currently would make sense. In comparison, there's nothing really to compare to. We got C still, that wouldn't make sense here. However, we're not contrasting anything. Okay, so currently would make the most sense there. A would have to be our answer. Question 29. Archaeologist Sue Brunning explains why the 7th century ship burial site at Sutton Hoo in England was likely the tomb of a king. First, the gold artifacts inside the ship suggest that the person buried with them was a wealthy and respected leader. And then blank, the massive effort required to bury the ship would likely only be undertaken for a king. All right, so I would assume that that's something that is basically stating that it's likely. So the massive effort required, that's in addition to what came before it. We have first, okay, and then we'd have something like secondly here. Okay, second, yeah, perfect. We've got a match with the first, so our answer would have to be answer choice D. Question 30. The more diverse and wide-ranging an animal's behaviors, the larger and more energy demanding the animal's brain tends to be. Blank, from an evolutionary perspective, animals that perform only basic actions should allocate fewer resources to growing and maintaining brain tissue. The specialized subtypes of ants within colonies provide an opportunity to explore the hypothesis. Okay, so transitioning here, we start out with basically a statement, right? The more diverse and wide-ranging an animal's behaviors, the larger and more energy demanding the animal's brain tends to be. And then because of that, from an evolutionary perspective, animals that perform only basic actions should allocate fewer resources. So this is causal. So we got option A subsequently, which would be if something happened after something else, which isn't the case. We have besides, which it's not. This is a causal relationship. Nevertheless, it's not in spite of anything, so that would make sense. And then we have thus. Okay, so because of what came before, thus what came after, which makes perfect sense here when we describe the evolutionary perspective that would make this make sense. So answer choice D would have to be our answer there. Question 31. When designing costumes for film, American artist Sudirat Larab typically custom fits the garments to each actor. For the film Sunshine, in which astronauts must reignite a dying sun, she designed a golden spacesuit and had a factory reproduce it in a few standard sizes, lacking tailor-made quality. The final creations reflected the ungainliness of actual spacesuits. All right, so what is the best transition here? Well, we have that she typically custom fits the garments each actor, but now we're describing a contrast to that because she just ordered a bunch of standard sizes instead of having a custom fit. So this is a contrast. So causal wouldn't make sense. Likewise, nothing similar. Nevertheless would be in spite of, which would be a pretty good alternative for a contrast since we don't have a straight contrast here. We have moreover, which would be kind of like in addition to, which wouldn't make sense here. Okay, in spite of the fact that she typically custom fits these, for this film, she wasn't able to, and she got a few standard sizes. So that would make sense there. So A would be our answer for 31. Question 32. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Xuan Tan is an Australian author. In 2008, he published Tales from Outer Suburbia, a book of 15 short stories. The stories describe surreal events occurring in otherwise ordinary suburban neighborhoods. In 2008, he published Tales from the Inner City, a book of 25 short stories. The stories describe surreal settings occurring in otherwise ordinary urban settings. The student wants to emphasize a similarity between the two books by Xuan Tan. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? So similarity between the two books, basically that they both have short stories. First one 15, second one 25, one from suburbia, one from urban. We have option A, Xuan Tan's book from Suburbia, which describes surreal events occurring in otherwise ordinary places, contains fewer short stories than this one. Well, that's not talking really about a similarity. It's almost trying to highlight the difference as far as the number. We got B, Tales from Outer Suburbia was published in 2008. This one's in 2018. That's not talking about the similarity. C, unlike Tales. Okay, so unlike pretty much means we're going to have something that is a dissimilar. Xuan Tan's book is set in suburbia. Okay, that wouldn't make sense. D, Xuan Tan's books, Tales from Outer Suburbia and Tales from Inner City, both describe surreal events occurring in otherwise ordinary places. That is emphasizing a similarity between the two books, so D would have to be our answer there. Question 33. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. The factors that affect clutch size, the number of eggs laid at one time, have been well studied in birds, but not in lizards. A team led by Shea Marie at Tel Aviv University investigated which factors influence lizard clutch size. Marie's team obtained clutch size and habitat data for over 3,900 lizard species and analyzed the data with statistical models. Larger clutch sizes was associated with environments in higher latitudes that have more seasonal change. Lizards in higher latitude environments may lay larger clutches to take advantage of shorter windows of favorable conditions. The student wants to emphasize the aim of the research study. Okay, well, we can go back up. We can see what the aim was. We wanted to determine which factors influence lizard clutch size is the aim. All right, so let's go ahead and go down to our answers. We've got options A, B, C, and D. A states that researchers wanted to know which factors influence lizard egg clutch size because such factors have been well studied in birds but not lizards. That's perfect. We'll take a quick look at B, C, and D. After they obtained data for over 39,000 lizard species, that's too far. That's in a data collection. We just want to know the aim. If we look at C, we now know that lizards in higher latitude environments may lay larger clutch sizes. Okay, that's stating the conclusion. We don't need that. D, researchers obtained clutch size and habitat data. We're not at the point of collecting the data. We just want to state what the aim is. So our answer would have to be A. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and consider sending a super thanks to help support my channel. Additionally, please drop a comment below letting me know what videos you want me to make in the future. And if you are looking for additional educational services that I offer, please check out my website, haydenrhodea.com.